Honey, so you can see what's going on. What's going on? Hey, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. Woo.
All right, welcome to What's Happening Now on KBOKradio.com. And thank you for tuning in. This is your host, Bishop Bowser, and we have an exciting show for you today. And everyone should be listening. So right now, I want you to text or call 7 people and encourage them to tune in to this show. Today we were, I guess, I don't know if it's the time change or what happened, but with these youngsters, the 2 young men that we were supposed to have on the show today, no show. so we're going to still have a good show today, but I guess this time has changed, and those of you that are listening right now and was able to wake up and tune into the show, really appreciate it and thank you. And you probably really got to call some folks today, because folks are probably thinking that right now it's 8 o'clock in the morning and really it's 9 o'clock. So it's time for us to start making those calls and texts and tweets and so on to get folks to listen to the show. But today's topic, we're still going to be talking about black males, and we're going to be talking about young black males. And we're still going to deal with the issue of overcoming poverty, media stereotypes, and violence. And this is an important issue that we have to look at, because these are the things that are affecting our community, and especially affecting people of color. When you look at young black men and brown men, Latinos and blacks, this is what hits us hard: poverty, media stereotypes, and violence. And when you look at poverty, poverty is the under root cause of a lot of other things that goes on in the community, whether you want to look at crime and so on. So we're still going to talk about that and get into some of this today. But I want to give you some facts here and talk about this for a minute. And I was looking at an article on PolitiFact. And this is a website where they give you some facts on crime and different things like that. One of the things I was looking at is that the criminal homicide rate among young black males is significantly higher than other groups. And a lot of times we know that, and we talk about that, about how, especially dealing with the black on black crime, that there's a lot of violence, a lot of homicides, and a lot of deaths that are going on in our country. A lot of times people take that and try to put a negative spin on it, and blame the victims, rather than looking at the real underlying causes of some of these problems. And we know that a lot the root cause of many of these problems is structural racism. We're dealing with systems and institutions the homicides in America are black people. And so we're going to look at that, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But, experts agree that a lot of what is happening when it comes to these homicides has to do with poverty and geography. The difference in social structures, access to jobs, educational opportunities, and many other factors between impoverished black neighborhoods and others is often a matter of life and death. And so we have to look at that, and we have to understand that over 80% of long-term child poverty occurs in broken or never married homes. And so when we look at that and talk about child poverty, and if we want to deal with poverty, because we know that under that, or the root cause of crime and violence and even the traumas that are in our community, a lot of it stems from poverty. And so if we're going to fix that, we have to fix some of the underlying issues. And if we're looking at 80% If long-term child poverty occurs in broken or never married homes, then we got to fix the home. We got to look at that home. And one of the things that we see here is that broken homes. A lot of our young people, when they get married, the bottom line is they're not prepared for marriage. And I don't want nobody to get mad at me here, but then when you look in the church is a bad example of this type of thing that is happening and that is going on in society. Whether you look at divorce, there's a high rate of divorce in church. In fact, just many divorces in church as there is out in the world or out in our community outside of the church. And then when you look at pastors, a lot of pastors are getting divorces. Now, I'm not criticizing them. I'm not judging them because I'm married, been married for 30 years, but our marriage can go sour tomorrow. So I'm trying to be humble about this and be realistic about this. But also, we must look at the problem. And if the church is not being a good example of what marriage should be about, and if we accept that as a norm, it affects our society as a whole. And so when you have divorce all over the place, you have divorce in the church, divorce in the ministry, divorce in politics, it's a common thing. Today, men are changing wives like they change shoes. Women are changing husbands like they're changing dresses. You can look in the church and you got 2 and 3 sets of children by different men. Don't get mad at me. And you got daddy go to one church and mama go to another church, and some of them have 2 and 3 husbands sitting up in the same church. Kids don't know who to call daddy. So don't get mad at me. Don't get mad at me. And I'm not here to preach to you, but we're talking about poverty. We're talking about poverty. We're talking about the underlying causes of the other issue, the greater issues that we're dealing with, because we know racism plays a big part in when we're talking about poverty, when we're talking marginalization, when we're talking about all the institutions and fragmented systems that we have in our community, where you look at the home, you look at the schools, you look in the community organizations, or you look at agencies, you look at the criminal justice system. When you look at all these various systems and institutions, we know that there is a structural racism, that we have issues and problems that are happening and that are going on that is out of our control. But there are some things that are in our control. And this 80% long-term child poverty, if it occurs in broken homes or never married homes, that means there's a lot of children. We're going to talk about this in a minute. I know, can we get real? This is KBLK radio, right? And that's black radio. So let's get real with each other. It's just us. I don't think nobody from Fox News is listening to this, so they can go and spin it on their show. So let's be real with each other, and let's let down our hair. Let's take off our shoes, and let's come in the living room and have a little family talk with each other about this, because we got to get real with each other. So why is there so many divorces in our community and in our society, and especially among blacks? And why are there so many children being born out of wedlock with women that have never been married, and so on? So we got to look at that. I'm not a psychologist, and I know I don't have all the answers to that, but I know on a spiritual side, sin is a big problem. When we leave God, we bring a lot of problems upon ourselves, because God can help heal the family. And so we most definitely need to look at that. But we also need to look at a lot of our young people are probably prepared for a lot of things, but they're not prepared for a family. They're not prepared for marriage. A lot of young folks jump up, get married, and you Google eyes, you're madly in love, and you want to get married, and I want to marry him, or I want to marry her. And at that moment and at that time, you thinking, man, I'm gonna spend the rest of my life with this young lady or with this young man. But if you're not prepared and you really don't understand the commitment that you're making when you do get married, you getting married, soon you have some problems. And after 6 months of marriage, it's going to end up on the rocks saying you can't make it. They say on the average, a marriage can last as an average marriage lasts maybe 7 to 10 years. So if you're not prepared, you're going to fall within that equation, and you're going to find yourself divorced. And then when you have a broken home, it becomes more difficult to survive and to thrive in a community where you're doing well economically, where the home is doing better, and so on. So with all the other things we're coming up against, we got to fix our problems in our own living room. And so here, 80% of long-time child poverty occurs in these broken homes. Why are these homes broken? They're broken for many reasons. And one of them is because folks are not prepared for marriage. A lot of times, yes, there could be infidelity, sexual immorality running rapid. But there are 5 reasons why homes break up. There are 5 reasons why people don't make it. And there's numerous reasons, but I'm going to try to give you 5 reasons. One is folks don't know how to handle their problems when it comes to sex. Sex causes marriage to break up when somebody don't want to give it up. Most of the time it's the woman, but sometimes it could be the man too. He get mad and don't want to have sex. That's one. The next thing that causes marriages to break up are children. Fighting over and dealing with children, whether it's children that the couple share, or children that may come that is outside of the marriage, that a person had before they got married. But children can be a problem and cause problems in a marriage. Also, money. Money is a big issue that causes marriages to break up. And we know that family gets in the way. So you got to get the in-laws and all those folks out of your marriage, because they will tear it apart. And of course, the most important thing is communication. And that's number 5, communication. We have to be able to communicate effectively. Communicating, I guess any form of communication would do, but if you want to have effective communication, it ain't about sending a message to your spouse on Facebook. Don't be texting them when you need to talk about a serious issue. You got to do that face to face. And with social media today, I think that's another problem that's creating havoc in the home and among marriages. So we're going to go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we're going to continue this discussion, because I got a lot to talk about. And in regards to we just still talking about poverty, haven't even got to media stereotypes yet, and got to violence. All right. So stay tuned to what's happening now, and we'll be right back in a moment. All right. Thank you for staying tuned to what's happening now on KBLKradio.com. This is your host, Bishop Bowser, and we want to thank you for tuning in today. We're talking about young black males overcoming poverty, media stereotypes, and violence. These are some great, some challenges to overcome, but we can do that. We can do it. And we were talking about, before we went on break, about long-term poverty occurring in broken or never married homes. And we discussed with you that 80% of long-term child poverty occurs in broken or never married homes. And look at this, 85% of all black children in poverty live in single-parent mother-child homes. Let me say this again to you so you can hear me loud and clear. 85% of black children in poverty live in single-parent or mother-child homes. Now, as I said before, we got to have some serious talk here. And yes, you know me, and if you listen and follow the show, you know that I'm always talking about structural racism and institutional racism, systemic racism, the criminal justice system, and so on, and always talk about it's a shared responsibility, because we all have to come together. There's no such thing as pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. We got to come together as a family, as a community, and solve these problems and work on these issues. But I think, when we talk about the home, we really got to take an honest look at ourselves. As Michael Jackson said, I'm looking at that man in the mirror, and I'm telling him to change his ways. And in the black community, there's some ways and there's some things that need to be changed if we're going to see prosperity and success among our youth, because right now poverty is doing it. And so look at this and listen to what I have to say here. When you look at 80% of long-term child poverty, and you look at 85% of black children that are in poverty come from a single-parent home, and that's their mother and child homes, these are contributing factors to the poverty problem that we have in the black community. And so when we talk about broken homes and we talk about never married homes, 72% of all black children are born out of wedlock. Now, we know sometimes things happen and people mess up. And by the way, let me just tell you, while we're talking about this, I was born out of wedlock. My mother was a single woman when I was born. And when most of my sisters were born out of wedlock, except my baby sister. But so I come from the same kind of background. So as we talk about this, I'm not exempt from it, and I've been through it too. But we got to work together to try to fix this problem. If we don't face ourselves and face our own issues, we're not going to be able to resolve them. And we want to be able to resolve these kinds of issues. And so, sisters and brothers, young men, keep your pants up. Young ladies, keep your blouses and dresses. I know some of you wear pants. Keep those blouses down, dresses down, skirts down, rather, excuse me. And wait till you get married. Thank you. Now, when we talk about abstinence, we talk about how many of our young ladies and young men today that are 21 years old or younger that are still virgins. Sex is basically a common thing that people are doing, and we're not really thinking about the consequences. I can go to the movies or walk through the mall with my wife, and you see young people sitting in chairs, sitting on each other's lap, all kissing and everything, and you know that they're probably having sex. And the first thing I think about is Maury Povich show, right? On his show, you got a lot of people on there. Well, I'm not the father. And she was messing around with all kind of women, and all people think about is sex. But then when the baby come, nobody wants to claim it, and so you got a problem there. So people don't think ahead of time, and it's not okay. Having sex out of marriage is not okay, and that's one of the problems, because you're looking at 72% of all black children are born out of wedlock. So it's time for our young men to take some responsibility, and before you think that you got a right, amen, to just jump on top of somebody, make sure you're married to them first. Because one of the things that we got to look at is, and this is what I preached in the church yesterday, is talking about commitment. The difference between an individual that's shacking up and an individual that's married is commitment. And that's the problem today, is that we lack commitment in our communities. We lack commitment in the home. So until we get committed to each other, and sister, young lady, if that brother don't want to commit to you, and you say, how will I know if he's committed? Well, if he doesn't want to marry you, he's not committed. I don't care how much he tell you he loves you. I don't care how much money he's spending on you. I don't care how he's telling you how beautiful you are, how good you smell, and how much you mean to him. If he don't want to marry you, he's not committed. And if he's not committed, you get pregnant, he's going to bail out on you. You get pregnant, you're going to have that baby, and you're going to end up being among this 85%. So you got a responsibility to keep those legs closed until you get married. And this is not just church talk. We got a problem in our community, and we're trying to solve these problems. This is one way we can solve the problem: keep your legs closed. Now, it ain't going to solve all our problems. Don't get me wrong. I don't want people getting mad at me and saying, hey, wait a minute, what about the... We understand all of that. But we just want to have some serious talk with each other. There's another stat that I was looking at, and the other stat was 65% of never black married women have children. And that's double. And it's double that for white women. Let me say this again. 65% of never married black women have children. And that's twice as much as what's happening among white women. And so something is lacking. Something is missing. What are we being taught in our home? What are we being taught in our schools? What are we being taught in our churches? What are we being taught in our communities that we have a problem like this? So that's why I say we're dealing with fragmented systems, and we know that there are issues that need to be addressed in our educational system, in the home, in the church, and in the community. If we're going to fix these issues, yes, it is a shared responsibility, but we got to begin somewhere. We got to start somewhere, and why not start in the home? Why not start in the community? And then, especially in the church should be taking the lead on this when we're dealing with a lot of these issues. And let me just say, 85% of black children, 85%, do not live in a home with their fathers. And that's a problem. And we got to try to fix that. And I just addressed how we could fix that. Some of the ways we could fix that. Only 15 to 20% of black children born today will grow up with two parents until the age of 16. By the time they get 16, they're probably going to be in a single parent home. It's not going to last that long. And that's 15 to 20%. So a lot, because you're looking at 85% is born out of wedlock. So, man, you have a high percentage of our children that are not going to have two parents in the home. And then we look at the criminal justice system. 70% of African American boys in the criminal justice system come from single parent homes. Hear that? 70% of African American boys in the criminal justice system, that's prisons and penitentiaries and jails, camps, and so on, come from a single parent home. So something is wrong somewhere. And I believe it part of the problem is in the home. Part of the problem is addressing morality or immorality and sexual immorality. So I want to move on. As we look at that, and we're talking about poverty. We're going to come back in a moment and talk about poverty. But I want to also look at the media, because when you look at our young black men, and when you look at poverty, we understand what's happening there. We understand. And let me just say this before I move forward, that we understand that our communities many times are being singled out and targeted in the sense of these laws, or these, I should say, racist and discriminatory laws that are passed that affect the black and brown community more than any other communities. And we understand the fact that when men are locked up and pulled out of their homes, they can't provide for them. And then when they get out of prison, get out of jail, or even if they're on parole but have a record, or probation and have a record, it's hard for them to get a job. It's hard for them to provide for their families. So we know that that's a problem. We know that those issues need to be dealt with also. But as we look at this, I want to talk about the media. And since the media rarely conveys outright racist messages or stereotypes, in fiction and in the news, they regularly preach the explicit lessons that racism is bad. We know, indeed, they do that. But we must explore more subtle aspects of media communication to discern its crucial impacts, because media has a great impact on us. Today, when you're watching TV, or when you're online, unless you go to a black website, just look on TV and see how many black folks is on, how many newscasters, how many actors are on the program that you're watching, or the TV show that you're watching, and you will see what we're talking about. Um, so we want to explore this. Negative stereotyping is a core component of media images of young men of color and an important force in reinforcing general racial antagonism or racism. The stereotypes arise not merely from the news, but from TV and film entertainment. So when you look at that and you look at the news and how they portray stories, whether it's dealing with gangs or whether it's dealing with violence, the issue that we have with Lincoln, there's no shame to their game. When you look at Lincoln High School, it's no shame to the game to come on and say, oh, that area is violent. That school is violent. But okay, let's don't just say that and portray that and attack our community. Let's look at all communities. Let's look at the communities of a lot of these schools. Let's look at Point Loma and downtown and some of the other places that are outside of Southeast San Diego and City Heights, and let's see how many calls were done for burglaries and assaults and so on. And you will see that it's probably more. And so, but a lot of times the media will make you think that the only place where there's crime is in the black community. And actually in the black community, and you look at other communities, like I think it's Point Loma, they have a higher rate of crime or people are calling in and reporting crime than you have in the black community. So we can't really just point it out, but in the news will portray that, whatever they do. And remember, whenever the news talk about gangs, that's just another way to say black and brown people and another way to attack black and brown people when they say gangs. And then they try to tie it into all these different things, whether it's crime or violence or sex trafficking and things like that. So what they're actually saying is that the only problem where you have crime and violence and sex trafficking is among black and brown communities. So those are the stereotypes that arise in the news, and many more different types of stereotypes. Think about it. In our communities, we have a lot of positive and great stories to tell. But how often do you see those stories told on the news? You rarely see it told. But the moment there's a shooting, the moment there's a homicide, the moment something happened in one of our schools, happened in one of our homes, and so on, they're all over the place, giving and telling their story, a racist story or a stereotypical story about our communities and so on. And even when you look at TV and film entertainment, the movies that are portrayed in our community, and yes, some of our black directors have a responsibility too to make sure that they portray positive outlooks or manifesting positive outlooks from our community versus the evil and the stereotypical and the racism that they normally portray us as violent, criminals, thugs, and so on. So let's look at this. And even in advertisement and sports programmings as well. So stereotyping, and equally important, the media failure to challenge traditional stereotype expectation in turn establish often unconscious mental connections for whites and others, so that perceiving a young man of color stimulates negative emotions such as fear and anger. So they get scared or they get angry. Now, one of the things I always say is that, when it comes to crime and a white person see a black person, they get afraid. And don't get afraid of the black person. You better get afraid of the white person. Because most of the time when a white person is victimized, they're victimized by another white person, not by a black person. So why, when a white person see a black person, they are afraid? Because of the media and the stereotypes that they put in there. That the only people committing crimes are black and brown, and more specifically blacks. So you better watch out when you see these guys. So people get afraid when they see us. When they see a young black man walking down the street or coming in a store or walking in your community, might be going to his girlfriend's house or wherever. You see him walking in your community, your neighborhood, and what are you doing out here? And folks get afraid and get scared. But don't realize that if you're really going to be victimized, if you're really going to be robbed or hurt or even killed, it's probably going to come from another white person, not a black person. But you white people believe that the black person is a greater threat because of what the media portrays. And that's the problem that we have. And we don't control the media. Black people don't control the media. Brown people don't control the media. White people do. And no matter how much you confront them on, no matter how much you talk to them about it, they continue to portray black people and brown people as violent, as crooks, and as uneducated, dumb and stupid, and so on, ignorant, and so on. They'll find the worst example and put it in the media. And so then, therefore, that reflects in the mind of people, and it stimulates negative emotions. And folks they have fears, and they get angry about stuff. So they see crimes committed, and they'll magnify it in our communities, or they magnify it when something happens to a white person. And then when it happens, oh, we got to pass a law. They get so angry, they'll vote. They'll pass, and even black people will vote for these laws. How many black folks was rooting for that criminal justice law when Bill Clinton passed that criminal reform bill? Or I don't even want to say reform because it wasn't reform, but the criminal law. And there was probably a lot of black people pushing for it too. When we look at Prop 21 that was passed, that deals with gang conspiracy, how many black folks voted for that? How many brown folks voted for that? Because we buy into the hype too, and the stereotypes too in the media. We call our own children terrorists too, because that's what the media says. So you got to be careful what's planted, or let me put it, we got to be careful of what's planted in our mind. The media contribute to the denial component of racial sentiments mostly by what they usually omit. Examples include the pervasiveness of present-day discrimination, and, given the importance of capital accumulation, the enormous financial harm still imposed today by discrimination against past generations. And that's one of the things we understand, and that's why I say, we're not here to attack the single home. But we're just saying we got some problems we got to fix and start working on. It's not okay. But we understand that there has been discrimination in past generations. It's culture, and it goes all the way back to slavery. So the role that poverty and joblessness play in raising crime rates and lowering marriage rates among young men of color, and the part played by larger structural changes in the global economy. These patterns of omission, when they omit things and leave those things out, along with the ways journalists tend to code much of politics as a zero-sum game in which those in the category white persons share common political interests against other categories of people, encouraging whites to perceive an inherent political conflict of interest with persons of color. And I believe that people like Donald Trump is a good example of that. We just can't blame the GOP and the Republicans, but we got to blame Democrats too, because they play into that same old thing. Even Hillary Clinton played into it back in the 90s when they were trying to get the law passed. And so you find many people play into it and they think it's okay because of the way the media paints the story. So media stereotypes are recurring messages that associate persons of color with traits, behaviors, and values generally considered undesirable, inferior, or dangerous. And we can start with the news. We can start with all these folks. Both print and electronic journalism frequently connect the following concepts with young men of color. And here it is: crime, violence, hypersexuality, poverty, especially underserving poverty, that is, poverty due to character flaws of the individual, and welfare. When they talk about welfare queens, they want to talk about a black woman, but welfare queen really is a white woman. More white women on welfare than black women. Okay? So then, one of the things that, we have to pay attention to in the media and make sure that we deal with is how it is subtle, how we buy into the dominant narrative. And so we got to ask ourselves, who's selling this story? And why are they telling the story the way they do it? So these reports not only stereotype young men, black and brown men who are featured in them, but they also reinforce negative emotions and a sense of social distance that may promote a belief in inherent group conflict. All of these can feed white support for policies counter to the interests of young men of color. And that's what we're dealing with today. And that's why it's, when you look at the prison system, 70% of those that are in prison are black and brown, because the laws targeted, when you deal with the crack cocaine and drug laws targeted towards blacks. When you look at blacks in sentencing and enhancements laws, more blacks and brown are receive longer sentences, enhancement sentences, and so on. And so the beat plays on. Look at our schools and the school system. You know, these young men that got caught up in the Lincoln High School turmoil, with the media came out. The officer, we're the school police officer, they got injured. You know, everybody's playing into the stereotypes when it benefits them. You hear what I'm saying? When it benefits them. You know, I remember back in the days when we were younger, you know, back in the 70s and 80s. People may still do it today, but I remember back when I was around crooks, you know, a person go and see some water on the floor in a store and slip and go on and act like he slipped on it and then sue the store. He hasn't been injured. He hasn't really been hurt, but he's pretending and faking like so he can sue and get some money. Now, I'm not saying the Abdi is the school police officer is pretending that he's injured or hurt, but unless we see the video, we really won't know what happened. And so all we can do is speculate when we hear all the various and different stories that are out there. So they got to release the video so we can get the true story. But there's a possibility that, you know, what if he is faking? I don't know. I'm not saying he is, but I know I've heard people say that he's faking, that he's pretending to be. Maybe he did get injured, but not like he's pretending to be injured. I mean, I'm not saying that. I'm just telling you what I've heard out there, and I think that needs to be addressed, because we try to buy into and play into the hype. And so then the media comes along and does an interview, and it just enhances that, reinforces that. And that's where we have a problem. We got to challenge that. So black and brown people that are listening, when you see stories that come on the news that you don't like, write to the news station. Call them, email them, you know, go down there and let them know that we ain't going for that. We're tired of you portraying negative images of our community, and start doing some positive stories. And when you do some positive stories, do the right kind of positive stories. You know, you got a lot of poverty pimps out there. You got a lot of folks that just playing upon the media and want to be seen on TV, and they really don't care about our community. They really ain't not out there doing anything, but they don't want to show up like they doing something. Not doing any real work in the community, but want to make it seem like they doing some kind of real work in the community. And so we got to address that too, because as a community, we allow those things to happen. We got to shut it down. I'm telling you, the way things are going to happen, you got to disrupt it. You got to disrupt the system. You got to shut it down. You know, like they did with that Donald Trump when he came to Chicago, they shut it down. And that's what you got to do sometimes, shut it down, because nobody's going to listen to you. They're not going to tell your story. So sometimes you got to disrupt it just to get your story out there. All right? So one of the things we understand, all of these things can feed white support for policies that encounter the interests of black and brown young men and women. The ways in which television and print news stereotype young men of color in particular, blacks and Latinos, as criminals and violent are varied and often rather subtle. So if you don't pay attention to it, if you don't know the story that they're trying to paint, you know, you'll get caught up into it too. So here are some examples From the extensive research literature that I've looked at, violence and youth, especially male youth, are closely linked. Most stories that feature young people on local news depict violence they commit or suffer, and in those stories, older white men are the dominant speakers. So pay attention to that for the most part. And then a lot of times, these older white men, they might make you think that they're in your corner, they're on your side. But then when they go tell the story, the narrative is painted in a negative way towards young men of color. So we have to be careful of that. Local news does not often portray young persons as positively contributing to society, but paint them as being a nuisance, violent, criminal, thug, all the stories, what happened in Lincoln High School, man, they still talking about it every day, always talking about it in the news, in the interview. So, and every now and then you might find a positive story. But even in that, they feel like they got to tell the other side. So, when they're doing the dominant narrative, and when they're trying to portray blacks and brown as in a negative light, they don't tell the other side of the story. So when you're telling our story, we don't need you to go and tell the other side of what happened to the other person. Just tell our story so we can get our story out there. All right? So now, one study found that blacks are twice as likely as white defendants to be subject to negative pretrial publicity. Sounds familiar? That's what just happened, right? At Lincoln High School. If you go look at the record and request all the assaults and different things that happen at the other schools, and even on officers, police officers, school police officers, or students or whatever, you will find that it just didn't happen at Lincoln High School. But that pretrial publicity hurts. And these young men that were arrested, what happened at Lincoln High School at the outskirts is not going to get a fair trial whatsoever. Excuse the squeaking. And not only that, but Latinos are 3 times as likely as whites to be portrayed in the media as naked. So in crime coverage, more generally, whites are overrepresented as victims of violence and as law enforcers, while blacks are underrepresented in these sympathetic roles. So that's why we don't get no sympathy. And that's why, whites get sympathy and blacks don't, because we are always portrayed and looked upon as being in a negative light. So when you look at crime coverage and when you look at victims, the victim is always a white person for the most part. And that black, and when you look at, and as I talked about it earlier, even when we talk about the homicide rate and 50% of the homicides in America are blacks, they always paint that in a negative light, right? They always portray it as a negative thing, but they don't look at the underlying issues that are going on. They don't look at it as a shared responsibility. They don't look at it as we got a problem, but it's they got a problem or he got a problem. And like I said, that's why I was careful with the family thing, because then Fox News, it's the family, But you got a lot of other stuff that's going on that needs to be addressed and that needs to be fixed if you're going to even fix the family, especially in the black community because of the negative light we are portrayed in. So then, let's move on because we're running out of time. Like I told you, I can just talk and talk and talk. But in some areas, at least Hispanics may receive even worse treatment than blacks. There was a study that found that 1 in 20 whites appearing on local TV news in Orlando were criminal suspects, compared with 1 in 8 blacks and 1 in 4 Hispanics. So we know black and brown, so sometimes the table turn where it's not, blacks and brown are mistreated no matter what, but sometimes the table turn where it affects more of the brown community than it does the black community. Sometimes it affects more the black community than it does the brown community. But either way, black and brown is affected by this. So in some notorious, highly publicized crimes, such as the 1989 alleged rape of a wealthy young white woman in Central Park by a gang of Hispanic and black young men of color appear particularly susceptible to portrayals that associate them with extreme threat and less than human traits. Narratives routinely used such as savage and wild, and sometimes they put thugs and those type of things. And when those portrayals go in the media, we need to, like, when we talk about us, and when other folks talk about us, we got to correct them and let them know that we're not thugs, we're not savages, we're not wild, but we're human beings, we're people, and whatever. And what you call whites, you got to put us in the same curtain and call us that too, because it's always going to be in a positive light, whatever words you use. So here's another report. Studies of local news in Chicago and elsewhere suggest that depictions of black suspects, mostly young men, tend to be more symbolically threatened than those of whites accused of similar crimes. They always a threat. Black defendants in one study were more likely to be shown in mugshots, in the ubiquitous perp walks. Blacks were twice as likely as whites to be shown under some form of physical restraint by police, although all were accused of scary and generally violent crimes. One complexity to note is that it may well be true that police officers physically restrain more black defendants than they restrain white defendants because of the cops' own racial fears. So, most of the time when you come in our community, they tell you sit on the curb. They come in your home and doing a compliance check, probation or police, whoever, they handcuff you because they feel threatened. They're scared. They got a gun, but yet they still scared. They got all that training, but they're still scared. And what they say, I want to go home. But I wonder, are you doing that in all homes? Or is it just done in people of color's homes? So when we look at these things and when we talk about poverty, the media, and the violence that we deal with in our communities, and how it portrays young black men, policies and laws and our perception, the emotional makeup of it, the fears and the angers are directed towards our young men because of how we are portrayed and how they are looked at. So we got to fix that. And we got to deal with that. And we got to start like we have with KBOKradio.com. You got to promote this. You got to get the word out there and let people know that this station exists so that folks can come in and get a different perspective, a black perspective versus a white perspective. Support your black media. Support your black news. And let's get behind the various black promoted things that we have going on in our community. And so, because another thing we don't look at, and another problem we have, and we only have a few more minutes. I think I have about 1 minute, so I want to just share this with you. We got to also look at system-induced traumatization, and a lot of times our young people are traumatized and re-traumatized, and then when they go to school, they want to accuse them of having ADD and ADHD and other child misbehaviors, and they're not really looking at the traumas that come from racism, that comes from structural racism. The fragmented systems that we're dealing with, and the harassment, the violence, and all the other things that we deal with in our community. They don't look at all of that. And so we got to deal with those. And then we got to deal with cultural traumas, because that affects our community. And we got to go look at past generations and see what the problem is and try to fix it, and so on. So we thank you for tuning in to What's Happening Now, KBLKradio.com. And we encourage you to tune in next week for another great show on KBLKradio.com. What's happening now? And so thank you for tuning in. And want to encourage you to, and all the listeners, to come by and visit our church worship service on Saturdays at 11:30 a.m. at 610 South 30th Street, San Diego, California, 92113. So thank you for listening. Tune in next week for another great show with What's Happening Now with your host, Bishop Bowser on KBLKradio.com. And may Yahweh bless you.